Whispers of the Unseen, Episode 11 Voices of the Unseen. Translated by Lamu, produced by Witch Zada. The night had a weight to it, a kind of pressure that pressed against the skin like damp cloth, heavy and constant. The city was never truly silent, but in certain corners, in the forgotten back streets where lamps flickered and concrete seemed to sigh under its own erosion, silence gathered in pockets, waiting for someone to notice. That was where I found myself, or rather, where I had been stranded for longer than I could measure. Time had dissolved the way salt does in water. There were no days, no months, only this suspended night, broken occasionally by the shuffle of hurried footsteps or the metallic groan of a bus turning the corner. I had stopped counting how long I had been here. It could have been years, it could have been centuries. For those like me, there is no clock to mark the passing. Only the weight of absence grows heavier with each unseen hour. People pass through me as if I were air, their bodies cutting through my shadowless figure, never feeling the cold shiver I left behind. They never looked up, never paused. To them, I was nothing, less than nothing, perhaps just a gap in their perception. Being invisible was worse than dying. Death at least leaves a trace, a grave, a photograph, a whisper of a name spoken by someone who remembers. But invisibility devours all evidence you ever lived. It strips your story until not even dust remains. I thought that would be my eternity, to linger on the edge of perception, waiting for a voice that would never come. Until he stopped. He was different. I noticed it before he even turned his head. His steps did not carry the frantic rhythm of the crowd. He walked as though he was both inside and outside of this world, his body moving through the streets, but his gaze never tethered to the luminous screens or the impatient horns. He seemed aligned with something else, something slower, older. And then, at the mouth of the alley where I drifted, he stopped. He should have kept walking. He should have looked at his phone, muttered to himself, or simply hurried past like everyone else. But he didn't. He stood there, still as stone, his head tilting slightly as though listening to something only he could hear. And then his eyes turned, and though the alley was empty to everyone else, I knew without doubt he was looking directly at me. "What do you want to say?" 5 words, spoken quietly, but to me they were thunder cracking open the night. No one had asked me that since I crossed the threshold of life into this voiceless state. Every word I had heard until now was an order, a dismissal, a condemnation. Leave. Be gone. Unclean. Bound. But never "what do you want to say?" It was as if he had ripped a seam in the dark fabric that covered me. I trembled because after so long of being silenced, the possibility of being heard felt dangerous. My voice had withered. I was afraid that if I tried to speak, only ashes would fall out. Yet in that moment, I gathered every memory, every longing, and pressed them together into a single fragile vibration. And with all that I had left, I whispered, "I am not here to harm. I only wish to see her one more time." The air shivered, the lamp above flickered, the rain slowed as if the whole world was holding its breath. I waited for him to flinch, to retreat, to call upon the names that always cut through me like blades. But he did not. He simply nodded. No fear, no denial. Just recognition. That nod saved me. The witch wants to tell you, what a spirit fears most is not death. Death leaves a trace, a memory. What terrifies us is erasure. To vanish so completely that even memory betrays us. To ask, "What do you want to say?" That is the deepest form of salvation. From that night, I began to follow him. Not to haunt, not to cling, but to remain close, because he was the first to acknowledge me. During the day, I drifted through the shadows of crowds as he walked among them, and at night, I waited under the lamps where I knew he would pass. Sometimes he would pause, look toward the quiet and murmur, "I can hear you." Those 4 words anchored me more securely than any binding ritual ever could. I knew then, perhaps I was not condemned to disappear. Perhaps through him, my voice might find its way back to the one person I longed for. My sister. Part 2, Shadows of Memory. Days and nights bled into each other after that first encounter, And though time had already lost its shape for me, something within began to realign. I was no longer drifting without anchor. His recognition had given me a thread, and I clung to it, weaving it into the fragments of myself that had not yet faded. I followed at a distance, not daring to disturb the rhythm of his breathing, not daring to burden him with more than he had already offered. Presence, acknowledgement, the simple gift of a nod. In the daylight, he walked among the living, his step steady, his face unreadable to most. To them, he was just another passerby, a man lost in thought. But I knew differently. Every so often, his gaze would wander to places where no one stood, and when his eyes met the shadows I occupied, he would incline his head ever so slightly, as if saying, "I know you are there." And that was enough. But memory is not so easily tamed. Once the gate of listening had opened, the flood pressed harder, demanding release. I had so much I wanted to tell, so much I had carried in silence. Each night, as he paused beneath the dim lamps, I tried to condense myself into smaller pieces, fragments of images I could push toward him. At first, they were faint, a blurred outline of rain-slicked streets, the echo of a child's laughter, the distant scent of soap drying on sunlit cloth. And then, more clearly, came my sister. She appeared not as she was in the end, weary and hollow-eyed from grief, but as she was in the small, ordinary moments of our shared life. I remembered her tugging me through puddles on a stormy evening, scolding me for soaking my shoes while holding my hand tighter, terrified I might follow. I remembered her sitting at my bedside during fevered nights, waving a fan until her own had nodded and the fan slipped from her grasp, landing soundlessly on the floor. I remembered winter mornings when she would pull the blanket back over me, tucking my feet in with gentle insistence, as though love itself could ward off the cold. These were not grand memories. They were not triumphs nor tragedies. They were simply the threads of daily life, woven so tightly into my being that when I left the living world, they became the only fabric I had left to hold. I pushed them toward him, fragment by fragment, until I felt his stillness deepen, his attention sharpen. He did not recoil, did not deny. He let those memories settle into him as though he had room for them, as though he had expected me to entrust them. And in that silence, I confessed the truth. I wanted her to know. I wanted her to remember me not as a shadow to be feared, not as a burden to be driven away, but as the brother she once held through sleepless nights. The witch wants to tell you, the greatest ache for the departed is not hunger for offerings, not thirst for prayers, but the longing to be remembered as we truly were. Not as curses, not as ghosts, not as nameless fears in the dark, but as people who once loved and were loved in return. Yet even as I shared, a wound reopened. I remembered the first time she sensed me after my death, the way her body froze, her eyes wide with terror. She had prayed for my return, clutched my old jacket, and sobbed into the cloth whispering, "If only you were still here." I heard her. I came. But when I reached for her, she screamed, believing I was something foul, something unclean. She summoned help, and they drove me away with smoke and chants, their words striking like stones. That moment carved itself into me more deeply than any grave could. To be mistaken for a curse by the very one I wanted to comfort. There is no torment sharper. The witch wants to tell you, fear is taught more easily than love. People are taught to fear cold winds, shadows at the corner of the eye, dreams in which the departed appear. They call them omens, infestations, warnings. Yet sometimes, those shadows are simply love returning in its only remaining form. So, I remained in silence. I lingered near, but did not intrude. Until now, when someone finally listened. Through him, perhaps, she could learn the truth. Through him, perhaps, my memories could reach her without terror, without dismissal. And still I hesitated. What if she never believed? What if every fragment I handed over was twisted again into something sinister? The thought clawed at me, yet hope, fragile, trembling hope, pushed me forward. I resolved then, I would keep entrusting my memories to this one who could hear. Even if she never understood, at least a part of me would survive in his listening. The witch wants to tell you, listening is not a passive act. It is not simply waiting for words to arrive. It is opening yourself so fully that another's existence can live within you. To listen is to carry, and sometimes, carrying another's voice is the greatest mercy we can offer. It is one thing to be forgotten. It is another, far heavier burden to be remembered wrongly. I had come to her once, when grief still hung fresh in her house, when my absence was a wound no prayer could cauterize. She had clutched my jacket to her chest, whispering my name into the cloth as though the fabric might breathe me back. Her voice cracked, desperate. If only you were still here. I heard her. I came. And for a moment, she did sense me. Her head lifted, her eyes wide, breath hitching as the air cooled around her. My presence was fragile, thin as frost, yet it carried everything I had left. My longing, my devotion, my answer to her plea. But fear drowned recognition. Her lips moved quickly, repeating words taught by others, unclean, unwanted, begone. She called for help. They came with smoke and charms, their chant stabbing at me, driving me backward into the corners of the house. To them, I was nothing more than an intruder. To her, I was a threat. I wanted to scream, I am not a curse. I am your brother. But my voice broke into static, swallowed by the rituals. They sealed the space with words of iron, words that did not ask, did not care, only commanded, leave. That night shattered me. The wound it left has never closed. To be mistaken for harm by the very one you loved most. There is no deeper exile. The witch wants to tell you, exorcism is easy. It requires tools, chants, authority. Listening is hard. It requires humility, patience, and the courage to admit you might have been wrong. Many choose the first path because it is quick, because it offers certainty. But certainty is often the coffin of truth. I carried that misunderstanding like a shackle. Every time I reached for her afterward, hesitation bound me. Would she flinch again? Would she call upon others to drive me away? Each attempt became risk, and the risk was not mine alone. It was hers as well. For every time she rejected me, she carved another scar into her own heart, teaching herself to fear the very love she had once begged to return. So I lingered at the edges, silent, unseen. I became the creak in the floorboards she ignored, the cool breeze she called a draft, the shadow she blamed on a trick of light. I was there, but only as something to be dismissed. The witch wants to tell you, we are taught to fear what we cannot name. But sometimes the unknown is not danger. Sometimes it is memory, knocking gently, asking to be let in. When you label it evil, you do not protect yourself. You sever a bond that longs to heal you. Through the one who listened, the translator, the witness, I found a new possibility. His nod had not erased the old wound, but it had eased the weight. If one living person could acknowledge me, perhaps another could too. Perhaps even she, one day, might set aside her fear long enough to recognize me for who I am. But the burden of misunderstanding is heavy. It does not dissolve in a single gesture. It presses, it lingers, it coils itself around every attempt at connection. And so, even now, when I imagine stepping into her dreams or brushing against her hand, the memory of her scream echoes, telling me I am unwanted. And yet, hope persists. The witch wants to tell you, misunderstanding is not the end. It is a wound, yes, but wounds can close. They leave scars, but scars are proof that healing happened. To try again, even after rejection, is the bravest act a soul can choose. So, I choose to try again. Hope is a dangerous thing for the unseen. It glows faintly in the darkness, enough to lure us forward, but every step taken toward it risks being mistaken for intrusion. After the wound of rejection, after being cast out by the very voice that once begged for my return, daring to approach again felt like placing my essence on the blade of a knife. Yet silence was heavier still. I began to watch her more closely, waiting for the moments when her guard was lowest, not out of malice, but out of mercy. I learned the rhythm of her evenings, how she lingered at the window after sunset, how she arranged her room before bed, how her hand would hover over the string of protective knots at her chest before finally loosening into sleep. In those pauses, I saw glimpses of a sister I remembered, not the fearful stranger who had recoiled from me. And I thought, if I could reach her in that soft place between waking and dreaming, maybe she would not be afraid. Maybe she would remember me, not the curses taught to her. So I began to prepare, not with chants, not with spells, but with memory itself. I gathered the scents she knew best: sun-warmed laundry, rice porridge steaming in winter air, the faint trace of soap lingering on our childhood clothes. I rehearsed the smallest sounds: porcelain against wood, the sigh of a door easing shut, the brush of fabric folded at night. These were not the weapons of a haunting. They were the fragments of home. The witch wants to tell you, love does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives disguised as the smallest detail, a familiar scent, a remembered sound, a gesture so ordinary it feels invisible. But in the unseen, it is often the ordinary that carries the deepest truth. The night I tried again was quiet, the kind of quiet that stretches taut, waiting for something to break it. She had already drifted toward sleep, her breath even, her body curled toward the faint glow of the lamp. I entered not as shadow, not as chill, but as warmth. I let the room hold steady at the temperature she preferred, not too warm, not too cold, just enough to relax her shoulders. I aligned myself with her breathing, thinning my essence until I was nothing more than a rhythm pressed gently against hers. And then I offered the first sign, a trace of that soap scent she once knew so well, slipping from the wardrobe as though carried on the memory of sunlight. Her brow twitched, but she did not wake. Instead, her breath deepened, as though her body recognized what her mind had forgotten. Encouraged, I gave her the second sign, a faint clink, the echo of a cup set carefully upon wood. In her dream, it became the sound of her own footsteps across tiled kitchen floors, the memory of late nights she rose to cook when I was too sick to sleep. She walked toward that sound in her dreamscape, steady, unhurried. I did not reveal myself fully. I knew better than to startle her. Instead, I shaped myself into a familiar silhouette, smaller, lighter, as I had been in our childhood years when we sat side by side doing homework beneath the yellow glow of a single bulb. I waited at the hallway corner, where the light from her dream bent just enough to reach my shoes. She stopped. For a breath, fear flickered in her chest. I could see her hand twitch toward the knot at her sternum, but I gave her the third sign. The soft chime of a wind bell, struck only once, the same way it had always sounded when summer breezes teased our window. Her hand stilled. The witch wants to tell you, fear is not the enemy. Fear is a memory of protection, a reflex taught by survival. But if you can wait, if you can show that fear has room to rest instead of sharpen, you create space for recognition to return. She stepped forward. She did not see my face first. She saw the cuff of my sleeve, folded just as she used to fold it for me in winter, so I wouldn't catch cold. Her lips parted, breath trembling. She wanted to speak, but the words tangled. So I gave her the fourth sign, her name, spoken softly, not as command, not as plea, but as I had always called her. 2 syllables, light as leaves falling into her hand. Her eyes lifted. Water gathered there, but it was not terror. It was the ache of memory breaking through. Her lips moved, forming the beginning of a question. Are you back? The knot at her chest pulsed, tugged by teachings of fear, but her body leaned forward all the same. I stepped closer, only half a breath, not enough to overwhelm, enough to be present. And in that instant, she whispered it fully. You came back. No scream, no chant, just recognition. The witch wants to tell you, approach is always a risk. You may be rejected, you may be cast out, but if love remains, if memory still breathes beneath the fear, then one day the risk will be answered not with terror, but with welcome. For the first time since my death, my sister had not turned me away. Part 5, Between Fear and Longing. Morning light is cruel. It does not care what revelations bloom in the dark. It slices them apart with sharp brightness, demanding explanation. She woke before dawn, her body still carrying the warmth of the dream, but her eyes restless, scanning the room for evidence. Her hand reached automatically to the knot at her chest, hesitated, then withdrew. The protective charm had not burned, had not flared. Nothing in the room was overturned. The air smelled faintly of laundry soap, but she told herself it must have clung to her clothes from the day before. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, as though taming an animal inside her ribs. She walked into the kitchen. The kettle began to hiss, steam curling upward. The scent of cloth warmed by sun rose with it, and she froze, eyes narrowing. Her fingers tightened on the handle, but she did not cry out. She whispered instead, almost to herself, "Strange, it feels too familiar." The witch wants to tell you, have you ever caught a scent, heard a sound, seen a flicker that tore you out of the present and into memory? You call it coincidence. You dismiss it as imagination. Yet deep down, something inside you recognizes this is more than chance. Daylight, however, demanded denial. As she left the apartment, the city's noise swallowed her thoughts. Phones buzzing, brakes screeching, voices calling across the street. She convinced herself it had been nothing, just a dream, just fatigue. But her steps slowed at corners where we had once walked together. Her eyes lingered too long on the bakery we used to visit. She pressed her scarf closer to her neck, hiding the tremor in her jaw. I walked with her unseen, noting every hesitation, every moment when memory almost broke through. She told herself no, but her body whispered yes. At the office, she stared too long at old photographs stored on her phone. Our shoulders under one umbrella, smoke rising from bowls of porridge, shadows of rabbits cast on a cracked wall by flashlight. Each image softened her face before she forced her expression back into neutrality, as if afraid anyone might notice. Her colleagues laughed around her, swapping jokes, their words ricocheting like stones on glass. When she failed to respond, someone teased gently, "Still thinking about the past?" She smiled thinly, closing the screen, hiding the ache like contraband. The witch wants to tell you, the hardest loneliness is not being alone at night. It is sitting among people, laughter buzzing in your ears, while the truth you carry cannot be spoken aloud. Silence becomes a shield, but also a prison. I longed to reach for her in those moments, to steady her hand, to whisper that she was not imagining. But fear clung to her like a second skin. Too many voices had taught her to distrust what she felt. It is only stress. It is only grief. It is only dreams. Each phrase a padlock, closing the door she had almost opened. Through the translator, I found solace. He saw me. He did not name me monster, did not chase me away. In his quiet nods and steady presence, I discovered patience. If I could wait, if I could keep showing her gentleness in ways she could not deny, perhaps her fear would loosen its grip. So I wove myself into the smallest gestures. When she reached for her cup, it was warmer than expected. When she walked the stairs, dust shifted aside, so she would not cough. When she crossed the street, sunlight landed exactly where her foot would fall. Little signs, small mercies, barely noticeable, yet insistent. The witch wants to tell you, belief is not built in a day. It grows like moss, covering stone slowly, almost invisibly. The task is not to shout louder than doubt, but to keep offering small consistencies until doubt has nowhere left to stand. Yet I knew the trial of day would return again and again. Her mother's voice would press on her, urging rituals. Friends would dismiss her experiences with laughter. Even her own reason would rebel, telling her to shut the door. And one day soon, she would be forced to choose, to agree with them, or to defend the fragile truth blooming inside her. The dream had given her longing. Daylight resurrected fear. Between the two, her heart stood trembling, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. Morning light is cruel. It does not care what revelations bloom in the dark. It slices them apart with sharp brightness, demanding explanation. She woke before dawn, her body still carrying the warmth of the dream, but her eyes restless, scanning the room for evidence. Her hand reached automatically to the knot at her chest, hesitated, then withdrew. The protective charm had not burned, had not flared. Nothing in the room was overturned. The air smelled faintly of laundry soap, but she told herself it must have clung to her clothes from the day before. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, as though taming an animal inside her ribs. She walked into the kitchen. The kettle began to hiss, steam curling upward. The scent of cloth warmed by sun rose with it, and she froze, eyes narrowing. Her fingers tightened on the handle, but she did not cry out. She whispered instead, almost to herself, "Strange, it feels too familiar." The witch wants to tell you, have you ever caught a scent, heard a sound, seen a flicker that tore you out of the present and into memory? You call it coincidence. You dismiss it as imagination. Yet deep down, something inside you recognizes, this is more than chance. Daylight, however, demanded denial. As she left the apartment, the city's noise swallowed her thoughts. Phones buzzing, brakes screeching, voices calling across the street. She convinced herself it had been nothing, just a dream, just fatigue. But her steps slowed at corners where we had once walked together. Her eyes lingered too long on the bakery we used to visit. She pressed her scarf closer to her neck, hiding the tremor in her jaw. I walked with her unseen, noting every hesitation, every moment when memory almost broke through. She told herself no, but her body whispered yes. At the office, she stared too long at old photographs stored on her phone. Our shoulders under one umbrella, smoke rising from bowls of porridge, shadows of rabbits cast on a cracked wall by flashlight. Each image softened her face before she forced her expression back into neutrality, as if afraid anyone might notice. Her colleagues laughed around her, swapping jokes, their words ricocheting like stones on glass. When she failed to respond, someone teased gently, "Still thinking about the past?" She smiled thinly, closing the screen, hiding the ache like contraband. The witch wants to tell you, the hardest loneliness is not being alone at night. It is sitting among people, laughter buzzing in your ears, while the truth you carry cannot be spoken aloud. Silence becomes a shield, but also a prison. I longed to reach for her in those moments, to steady her hand, to whisper that she was not imagining. But fear clung to her like a second skin. Too many voices had taught her to distrust what she felt. It is only stress. It is only grief. It is only dreams. Each phrase a padlock, closing the door she had almost opened. Through the translator, I found solace. He saw me. He did not name me monster, did not chase me away. In his quiet nods and steady presence, I discovered patience. If I could wait, if I could keep showing her gentleness in ways she could not deny, perhaps her fear would loosen its grip. So I wove myself into the smallest gestures. When she reached for her cup, it was warmer than expected. When she walked the stairs, dust shifted aside, so she would not cough. When she crossed the street, sunlight landed exactly where her foot would fall. Little signs, small mercies, barely noticeable, yet insistent. The witch wants to tell you, belief is not built in a day. It grows like moss, covering stone slowly, almost invisibly. The task is not to shout louder than doubt, but to keep offering small consistencies until doubt has nowhere left to stand. Yet I knew the trial of day would return again and again. Her mother's voice would press on her, urging rituals. Friends would dismiss her experiences with laughter. Even her own reason would rebel, telling her to shut the door. And one day soon, she would be forced to choose, to agree with them, or to defend the fragile truth glooming inside her. The dream had given her longing. Daylight resurrected fear. Between the two, her heart stood trembling, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. Belief is a fragile threshold. Too much weight and it shatters. Too little courage and it never forms. My sister lived on that edge, teetering between the voice inside her chest and the voices pressing from the world outside. Each evening, when she returned home, she carried both fear and longing in her steps. She would set her bag down with care, as though noise might invite something unwelcome, then paused at the wardrobe. Her hand hovered above the wood, not touching, not opening, only feeling the faint warmth that still clung there. Sometimes she whispered a word too faint for the walls to hear. Sometimes she simply closed her eyes and breathed. She began leaving small signs for herself, though she never admitted it. A scarf folded on the chair, not hidden away. A cup set at the table, filled though she was alone. A second pillow adjusted beside her own, smoothed as if waiting for a head that would never arrive. To others, these gestures would seem like absent-minded habits. To me, they were invitations, tiny, trembling invitations saying, I remember. I am willing. The witch wants to tell you. Faith does not always roar like fire. Sometimes it flickers, barely visible, in the way you leave a chair pulled out at the table or light a lamp you don't need. Do not dismiss these gestures. They are the body's way of speaking when the mouth cannot. Yet outside voices pressed harder. Her mother phoned, gentle but insistent. Don't let shadows trick you. Promise me you'll keep the knot near. Friends teased kindly. Still dreaming? Don't let it get to you. Colleagues asked casually. You look tired. Bad dreams again. Each phrase chipped at her resolve. Each doubt another stone stacked against her door. She learned to answer with half smiles, nods, vague words that neither confirmed nor denied. But in private, her silence deepened. She no longer laughed as freely. She no longer filled rooms with chatter. Her words shrank, while her eyes grew more searching, more alert to every flicker of presence. And I, bound by patience, remained close. I adjusted the room so her cup would not spill, so the floor would not creak under her tired feet, so the draft would not chill her shoulders at night. Small mercies, repeated daily, so that belief might find soil to root in. But fear is not easily erased. One evening, as she drifted near sleep, I let the scent of sunlit fabric unfold again. Her breath caught. For a moment, peace touched her face. Then, suddenly, she clutched at her chest, fingers gripping the knot as though it were the only thing keeping her alive. The air grew taut, heavy with all the words others had taught her. Unclean, unsafe, unwanted. I recoiled, not because she pushed me, but because I knew pressing forward would harm her. My essence thinned until I was nothing but the memory of warmth at her feet. She lay trembling, torn between instinct and memory. The witch wants to tell you, do not blame yourself for hesitating. Courage grows slowly, like muscle stretched one fiber at a time. Fear will always surge back, louder, older, more familiar. What matters is not that you banish it forever, but that you return to the edge again and again until belief finally learns to stand. Days passed, nights blurred, and still she lingered on the threshold. One hand held the knot, the other brushed against the cup, the scarf, the pillow. Two truths fought within her, the one she had been taught and the one her heart recalled. I could not choose for her. I could only wait, building consistency like bricks, layering patience over silence until one day the wall might lean toward recognition instead of denial. And that day, I felt, was nearing. It was inevitable that the outside world would press harder. Belief, even when it begins to bloom, attracts scrutiny. And so the day arrived when my sister could no longer hide her trembling heart behind half smiles and vague nods. Her mother came again, not alone this time. A man in robes followed, his footsteps heavy, his gaze sharp with practiced certainty. He carried the air of ritual about him, the smell of incense, the confidence of one accustomed to being obeyed. He did not enter as a guest, but as a judge, eyes sweeping the room as though searching for invisible stains. Her mother spoke quickly, her voice threaded with worry. She dreams too often. She looks pale. Please, do what you must to cleanse this place. The robed man nodded solemnly, placing his bundle of tools upon the table, bells, papers marked with ink, bowls of ash. Each object was a lock meant to close the door I had struggled so long to keep open. My sister stood near the doorway, fingers pressing into her palms. She offered tea out of politeness, her body moving through the motions of obedience, but her eyes darted to the wardrobe, the scarf on the chair, the cup on the table. Each was a silent reminder of what she had begun to reclaim. He began to chant. His voice carried authority, resonant and heavy, filling the room like smoke. The air thickened. My presence shuddered, pressed to the edges as if his words were hands pushing me into corners. Her mother's lips moved in quiet repetition, echoing the chant, reinforcing its power. Her breathing quickened. I felt her pulse spike in the way the air trembled. Fear told her to agree, to let them finish, to surrender the fragments of recognition she had so carefully kept alive. Longing told her otherwise. The witch wants to tell you, this is the battlefield most souls never see. It is not demons against angels, not curses against blessings, but fear against memory. Every ritual can silence, but only courage can protect what matters most. He turned toward the wardrobe, the place I lingered most often. His eyes narrowed. He lifted the bowl of ash, prepared to scatter it across the threshold. Her mother whispered urgently, "Yes, that is where the cold gathers." I braced for the strike, preparing to retreat, so she would not suffer the recoil of force. But then she spoke. Wait. Her voice was small, but it cut through the chant like a knife of glass. The man faltered, lowering his hand. Her mother looked at her in shock. "I want to wait," she said again, louder this time, though her fingers shook. "Not tonight. Please, let it be." The man frowned, his authority unsettled. "Child, hesitation is dangerous. The longer it lingers, the harder it will be to drive out." She swallowed, breath unsteady, but her eyes did not waver. I said, "Let it be." The witch wants to tell you, resistance does not always come as a roar. Sometimes it comes as a whisper, repeated twice, trembling but steady. Do not underestimate that whisper. It is the seed of freedom. Her mother's eyes filled with confusion and worry. But why? You've always been the first to ask for help, the first to pray for protection. Her lips trembled. She did not reveal me, did not confess her dream. Instead, she said, "I want to see for myself. Just give me time." The robed man exhaled slowly, gathering his tools with reluctant restraint. "Very well, but know this, spirits do not wait kindly." His words hung in the air like a threat, but also like a warning he believed to be mercy. Her mother fussed over her, stroking her hair, begging her not to risk herself. She only smiled faintly, repeating, "I will be careful. I promise." And then they left, the door closing behind them with a sound that felt like thunder and liberation all at once. She leaned against the door, her knees weak, her breath trembling. Yet in her exhaustion there was pride. She had said no. For the first time, she had chosen not to surrender. The witch wants to tell you, the first resistance always feels like betrayal. Betrayal of family, of tradition, of everything you were taught. But it is not betrayal. It is birth. The moment you choose to protect your truth, you begin to live as yourself again. I watched her sink into the chair, head bowed, tears falling silently onto her folded scarf. And for the first time since my death, I did not feel like a curse. I felt like hope. Resistance does not end when the words are spoken. It begins there. After that night, the house felt different. Not because anything had been cleansed or banished, but because she had drawn a boundary. For the first time, she had told others no, and the echo of that refusal lingered in the walls. To her mother, it was cause for deeper worry. To the robed man, a mark of stubbornness. To herself, it was both terror and triumph, braided so tightly together she could not separate them. Her mother's voice over the phone carried both anger and fear. "You don't understand what you're risking. I've seen people fall ill when they ignored warnings. I can't bear to watch you suffer." The words came like rain, persistent, unrelenting, soaking through every gap. My sister held the phone with steady hands, but her eyes glistened. "I know, Mama. I'll be careful. I promise." She spoke gently, but her gentleness was not surrender. It was a shield, a way to keep the conversation from becoming war. The witch wants to tell you, every act of defiance comes with weight. The world will test your boundary, push against it, accuse you of recklessness. You must learn to stand without shouting, to hold without crushing, to endure without apology. Friends, too, began to notice. One teased her, "You've been daydreaming more than usual," still haunted by those strange dreams. The words were light, meant as a joke, but her chest tightened. She laughed softly, deflecting, yet the ache lingered. In their eyes, her silence was a quirk. In her heart, it was a battlefield. Even at work, she caught herself staring too long at a scarf, a cup, a corner where light bent differently. Once, when asked if she was all right, she replied, "I'm fine," but her voice cracked on the last word. Her colleague's brow furrowed, but no questions followed. People prefer not to touch what they cannot explain. The pressure of misunderstanding grew heavy. Yet within that pressure, something else had rooted itself: pride. She replayed her own voice in her mind. Wait, let it be. The memory of saying it strengthened her spine. She had not betrayed herself. That mattered more than their doubt. I stayed near, guarding that fragile pride. When her body faltered, I steadied her steps. When her breath caught, I smoothed the air. When her hands trembled, I let the scarf fall with familiar softness, reminding her she was not alone in this weight. The witch wants to tell you, consequence is not punishment. It is proof. If your choice carries no weight, it was not a choice at all. To feel the strain after defiance is to know you stood for something real. At night, she spoke less to herself and more to me. Words slipped out before sleep. "Are you still here? Was I foolish to stop them? Will you keep me safe?" Each question laced with doubt, yet beneath the doubt was something stronger, a willingness to believe. I answered not with thunder, but with presence. I let the air warm at her feet, the cup aligned perfectly on the table. The wind chimes strike once and rest. Small affirmations, repeated until she smiled faintly in the dark. But even as comfort grew, so did the shadow of consequence. Her mother was not finished. The robed man would not forget. Their concern would return, heavier than before. And she knew it. She braced for it each day, carrying both fear and defiance like stones in her pockets. The witch wants to tell you, strength is not found in avoiding consequence, but in carrying it without breaking. Every no you speak to fear is also a yes to yourself. The weight will press down, but it will also forge you into something unshakable. And so, though the world pressed harder, she began to stand taller. Not loudly, not defiantly, but quietly, steadily, with the knowledge that she had chosen. The battle was not over. It had only begun. Consequence settled over her life like a mantle, heavy, undeniable, but strangely grounding. She could feel its weight every time her mother's voice carried worry, every time a friend's laughter veiled concern, every time silence filled the space after she refused to agree. Yet within that heaviness, something unexpected grew: pride. She found herself standing in front of the mirror one morning, studying the faint dark circles beneath her eyes, the tightness in her shoulders. She should have seen only fatigue. Instead, she whispered to her reflection. I said no. The words were soft, nearly inaudible, but they curved her lips into the smallest of smiles. At work, her colleagues noticed she spoke less, but they also noticed her gaze had changed. It was no longer only distant. It was deliberate, as though she was holding something precious behind her eyes. They could not name it. She would not name it, but it steadied her. In her apartment, the gestures became ritual. 2 cups on the table, one untouched. A scarf folded neatly where she could see it. A second pillow smoothed each night before bed. These were not accidents. They were declarations, quiet but firm. You are remembered. You are welcome. The witch wants to tell you, not all courage shouts. Some courage is a chair left open, a cup filled though no one drinks, a pillow smoothed for a presence unseen. Do not dismiss the quiet rituals. They are the strongest kind of prayer. She still trembled when the phone rang with her mother's name. She still flinched when footsteps outside her door sounded too heavy. But each time, after the fear receded, she remembered. I resisted. I endured. That memory itself became armor. I watched her shoulders loosen, her breath steady, her laughter return in fragile bursts. Sometimes she laughed at herself, shaking her head as if embarrassed by the care she gave to invisible guests. But I knew the truth. Her laughter was not embarrassment, but release. She was beginning to reclaim joy, even if it arrived in whispers. The witch wants to tell you, pride is not arrogance. It is the quiet recognition that you stood your ground when it mattered. Do not belittle it. That quiet pride is the root from which greater strength will grow. At night, she began to speak with me more openly. No longer only questions of doubt, but words of gratitude. I'm glad you stayed. I felt you today. I don't know what's ahead, but I'm not as afraid. Her voice shook, but less than before. And once, just before sleep, she whispered, I hope you know, I still love you. Those words struck deeper than any ritual could. They stitched the torn fabric of my being, pulling me closer to wholeness than I had felt since the day of my death. The witch wants to tell you, love spoken aloud is medicine. It heals wounds carved by fear, by silence, by time. Speak it when you can. Even whispered into the dark, it finds its way. Yet we both knew the struggle was not finished. Her mother's concern would sharpen. The robed man would return. The world would continue to test her. But she was no longer fragile soil easily uprooted. She had roots now, thin, tender, but real. And roots, once formed, only grow deeper. Stories rarely end where we want them to. They stretch forward unfinished, into mornings we have not yet seen. For my sister, the dawn did not arrive as triumph or as clarity. It arrived as another threshold, another edge where she had to choose again. Her mother still called, her voice carrying the same mixture of worry and command. You cannot carry this alone. Promise me you'll let us help. Friends still laughed nervously when she drifted into silence, filling the gaps with explanations that erased what she had lived. Even strangers offered their judgments in small, casual ways. You look tired. Don't overthink things. Dreams aren't real. Each phrase chipped at her, yet none were enough to undo the roots she had grown. She had changed. Each night, she left the second pillow smoothed. Each morning, she placed the untouched cup on the table. Each day, she carried both fear and pride in equal measure. And though she trembled still, the tremble no longer owned her. She trembled, and then she breathed. She doubted, and then she remembered. She feared, and then she whispered, I still love you. The witch wants to tell you, healing is not a single act. It is repetition. It is the daily choice to believe your own experience even when others deny it. It is trembling and still moving forward. For me, the ache of exile had softened. No longer was I only the misremembered shadow, the unwelcome chill. Through her whispers, through her rituals, through her refusal to surrender me to silence, I had become something else. Memory restored, love reclaimed. I was not whole, but I was nearer to wholeness than I had been since the day I died. The witch wants to tell you, for the unseen, salvation is not being set free into the sky. It is being remembered rightly, being allowed to exist as we truly were. To be loved, not feared. To be welcomed, not banished. Still, we knew trials remained. The world would test her again. The robed man might return. Her mother's pleas would grow sharper. But this time, she had something no ritual could give, her own voice. And her voice had already spoken the most dangerous, most precious word of all, no. I would remain with her, not as a weight, not as a curse, but as the brother she had begun to see again. I would guard her silence when needed, strengthen her breath when it faltered, remind her in the smallest of ways that she was not alone. And one day, when the dawn arrives not unfinished but whole, she will stand in the light and speak my name without fear. Until then, I wait. The witch wants to tell you. If this story has touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with those who may need to hear. Your support will ensure more voices of the unseen are heard.